Welcome to In Conversation with Kashmir Times. I'm Anuradha Bhasin, and joining me today is Professor Thomas Hansen. Professor Hansen is the Reliance Dhirubani Ambani Professor of Anthropology at the Stanford University. He has worked extensively on Indian politics and Indian society, and he's been working since 1990s. He is the author of some extremely insightful and enlightening books. More recently, he has co-authored a book with Christopher Jaffelot titled Majoritarian State, and he also wrote The Law of Force, the Violent Heart of Indian Politics. And I would strongly recommend reading both these books for those who want to understand contemporary Indian politics better. Professor Hansen, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
India is in the middle of parliamentary elections. And do you think these elections are crucial for determining not just who comes to power, but also for determining the future of India?
Yes, absolutely. We have talked about every election now in the last decade and a half, I think, as crucial elections. It's as if the importance, the pertinence gets more and more. I think this time the stakes are high in two ways. One is that I think there is a sense that the BJP and Modi will kind of has spent the last two terms in rolling out many of the policies and the intentions that they have. And now the stakes are, or the way votes are predicted seems to indicate that they could get a much bigger majority, which may put them in a position to maybe change India's constitution. So that's where that I think is in one dimension. That's where it's very important. The other thing is that India's growth story is continuing, but it's not as convincing maybe as many people would like it to be. There's been a long concern about the government not releasing figures, possibly fudging or only releasing partial information from the census to all kinds of economic data. And there's a big debate about that. And there's worry that this may be because some of the fundamentals of the Indian economy are not as strong as the Indian government would like everybody, including the electorate, to believe. So we see with the new manifesto from the BJP, this sort of emphasis on job creation, becoming the next manufacturing hub in the world, those kind of things. But there has been very little effort so far to address the fundamentals of the problems that are holding India's economy back, which is first and foremost the producing a actually predictable and stable business climate where companies from outside as well as from within can feel comfortable about investing in India, but also having a good, robust, and professional workforce. And those are investments in human capital that have not been done. So I think those are the two big issues: the future of democracy, democratic institutions, and the other one, the future of the economy.
Okay, let's take some of the issues that you just flagged. First of all, the BJP's slogan this time is Ab ki baar 400 par.
Yeah.
And I don't want you to go into the arithmetic, but do you think that's a very realistic figure? And could Modi even repeat what he did in 2019? Given that, you talked about there's not much to show on his report card in terms of economy. There are also charges of corruption. There is, of course, the decline in democracy. And there are limits to which he can push the Indian majoritarianism or the Hindutva agenda, which may have reached its saturation point. And if you look at the Modi ki guarantee, the manifesto, it speaks about jobs that there's no timeline. The timeline is probably 20 years ahead. So do you think he's still it's still a foregone conclusion that he could?
No, it's not. There was no foregone conclusions, but I mean, there is, of course, an attempt. I think the question is whether the Hindutva program has reached its saturation point, and in some ways, what happened in the winter with the inauguration of the temple in Ayodhya is sort of the crowning achievement of something the movement has wanted for a very long time, and they're trying to cash in on that. They're also trying to cash in on the sort of what in global politics is known as India's moment, the moment where the relationships between China and the US are cooling, and India is stepping up to be the new best friend of the US and Israel, by the way. So there is a moment, there's a way in which that they are trying to push that narrative, because the report card, as you say, is not glorious, right? It was not great with COVID and all that. The big question for me is really whether there is a correlation between the two, whether the BJP is elected on its performance, as we all have come to believe over the years that governments, and we've seen this in Indian politics, the anti-incumbency factor is strong, right? This is a kind of general law of Indian politics, certainly regional politics. If you don't deliver, you might be in trouble next time with the electorate. It seems that there's something about the way in which Modi as a person and BJP as a party has been able to, in a sense, create a new way of winning elections that are not necessarily connected to delivery, right? Because there's been very little delivery of anything. There's been delivery of hope. There's a delivery of a big story, a big inclusive story about India as a strong nation, a proliferation of ideas of the Indian army, a projection of strength, India is a great power, all these things, but very little in terms of people's everyday life. And a part of me thinks that the Indian electorate has kind of decoupled the two things. There is at the level of the national election. National election is all about the big story, whereas lots of politicians will be in trouble at the local level, even at the state level, if they don't deliver. So I think there's some of that going on. Whether they but it's interesting that the Modi Ki Guarantee is a kind of slogan, because it's kind of a guarantee of what, you know? It's like the guarantee vis-a-vis, like, is it not like the NREGA job guarantee program, right, which is associated with Sonia Gandhi, but also a guarantee for what? It's a guarantee of some vague thing, which is a kind of stability, maybe, of progress, of happiness, many things. So it's it's not hardline Hindutva as we saw in 2019. It's something else. So honestly, I think the BJP is playing on a field that they, in some ways, political field, they themselves have created by more or less reducing criticism and in the media to zero, right? So they created a situation where that is very in their favor. On the other hand, how long would that last, right? I mean, how long are people going to accept this one story and this one triumphant story? I don't know. So, the other part of that is, of course, that not all parts of India are enamored with this story. I was just spending some time in Andhra Pradesh and Tamil Nadu and so on. It's very clear when you are in that part of India that not only is there more prosperity than most other parts of India, it's very visible, it's very clear. There's a great deal of confidence about this, but there's also a complete sort of disregard for the big talking points of Hindutva politics. I mean, this is not what moves the public. These are questions of social equality, of caste issues, and things like that that are really moving the needle there. So, yeah. So the 400 point is, of course, a possibility, right? I mean, it is a possibility, but I won't go into, I mean, there are all kinds of questions have been raised about the integrity of the elections now with the new way in which the Election Commission has been appointed, is appointed. Can we trust the impartiality of this institution? And if we cannot, if there are doubts, can we then trust the results in quite the same way? That doubt has been sowed for the first time, I think. And I think that's not going to play well for them. I think there's been a slight overreach. Yeah.
So you do think that, a lack of level playing field would benefit Modi?
In the short run, yes. In some parts of
If
India,
nothing
in
else
other
does.
parts of India, not at all. I don't think people are
Yes,
impressed.
of course. You spoke about South India, and that's a
Yeah.
little different story. But it looks like apparently in January, which is not very long ago, just before the elections, we had when Modi inaugurated the Ayodhya temple and kind of declared himself to be the chosen messenger of God. It seemed completely like, he'd got the lead. And then suddenly something has changed in the last 2, 3 months. And of course, as you mentioned, he's not pushing Hindutva as much as he is now talking about jobs and other things. But has he been caught on the defensive, after the India alliance maybe kind of found its bearings and it seems to have found some direction, whereas it seemed clueless till some time ago. Is there a change because of that? He is, of course, using the Hindutva symbol still in his own rallies and the
Yeah.
rallies of
Yeah.
other
Yeah.
BJP people. He's spoken about the food eating habits
Yeah.
and all. Yeah.
So of course, I'm not saying that Modi is going to become less of a Hindutva or less of he is a RSS man through and through, and everybody knows that, and the BJP is very much about that. It's all about tactics, right? It's all about projection of a certain image. So I think maybe you can say that with your question with the opposition, yes. I mean, it's clear that the opposition has found a couple of strong talking points, and one of them is exactly this. Democracy is in danger. It's not an untruthful issue, right? I mean, that BJP, RSS, if you look into the history, the BJP is a political party operating in a democratic environment. The RSS and all its affiliated organizations are manifestly undemocratic organizations with an authoritarian leadership and structure. They do not believe in the principles of equality or democracy or democratic citizenship. That is not their agenda, never was. From the beginning, they have preached an idea of unity, organic unity, where everybody comes together. They're hostile to caste politics. They are hostile to special interests and on all that stuff, right? So is there an anti-democratic core in the Hindu nationalist movement? Absolutely. Would some strong elements in that movement like to see the constitution changed and maybe minority rights being hollowed out? Absolutely. Is this what they can? I mean, it takes a lot to do to change the Indian constitution. You have to have a really strong domination. I mean, Congress did it multiple times in the 60s and 70s. We know this, but that was a kind of dominance, the political dominance throughout that the BJP has not yet achieved. So that's one point about the democracy. The other thing is questions of social justice, right? And so I think the Bihar caste census was a very interesting moment, right, where it came up, where it was like it's almost as if Rahul Gandhi has embraced sort of Kanchi Ram's language of caste, right? Yeah, and in a good way. And I applaud him for actually doing that and actually having a leader of Congress actually speak about caste as an everyday social issue and a blind spot in the eyes of many people from socially and politically and economically dominant communities. I think that's really good. I don't know that that's going to be the big deal breaker or the big whether that will earn how much more support it'll earn Congress. I hope it might earn the India Alliance more support because social justice has been, I mean, ever since Modi came to power, any question of social justice has been ignored and buried under a kind of triumphant nationalism, right? And that's I think I applaud the India Alliance for actually doing this, and I think it needs to be hammered home because we are now told by some kind of manipulation of data that there is no more poverty in India. Only 5% of Indians are poor. It is such a preposterous. I mean, who is meant to believe this, right? Maybe policymakers in the US or something, but surely no right-thinking Indian can believe this, right? They just look out of your window. So there is a way in which that you can deny the language of social justice, but only so far. Right? You can deny, you can say, no, we don't want to talk about caste, but you can't keep on not wanting to talk about it because it's such a big part of people's social reality, right?
So is the opposition actually leading the narrative this time rather than being on the defensive, and Modi is being on the defensive?
That's a good question. I mean, you can make both arguments, right? I mean, they tried to get out ahead of the game and had this big the crowning of the emperor of Hindu hearts, right? That was his old title in Gujarat, and that was certainly one way of getting out in front and having a narrative that's very strong. But I think there's also a certain overreach, the sort of arrest of Kejriwal, the harassment of the opposition. Lots of people think this is not necessary. I think a lot of ordinary Indians still have a sense that democracy ought, I mean, discounting the maybe 35% who actually don't, or the even higher percentage that actually don't think democracy is a good thing. And, India has one of the highest rates of people in all these opinion polls about democracy. Who do you prefer, democracy or autocracy? India is one of the highest scoring on autocracy, right? Lowest scoring on democracy, which is a fact. But so even if we discount those people who are skeptical of democracy, who thinks that it creates chaos and social unrest and whatever, and division, among those who believe, which is still a clear majority of Indians, I think a lot of people feel that the game should be played in a fair way. You can't stack. I think it worked against Congress back in the day when Congress was all powerful and overplayed their hand many times, and it worked against them.
in 77, yes.
Such as in Kashmir, for instance, right? It worked against them. And I think it's going to work against BJP overplaying their hands. Putting opposition politicians in prison is a poor sign. It doesn't show a confident party. It shows someone, what are you afraid of exactly?
Yeah, is he, you're talking about the arrests of the opposition, Arvind Kejriwal, or freezing the accounts of the Congress. Is he doing it out of arrogance, or does he really feel threatened? And is it having a backfire effect?
I think they do it out of arrogance, but because they can, right? And that's what also made Congress do all these things that were awful. Let's not forget that, right? In the 60s and 70s and 80s, where there were routine abuse of power, routine abuse of presidential powers, and so on and so forth. Absolute president's rule, right? But it's out of arrogance, but it's an arrogance that is short-sighted, and that shows that, if you haven't got the guts to face an opposition in an election, how much are you worth, right? I mean, I think it's going to backfire because it comes across as a form of cowardice. You're using the state apparatus to quell or to silence your opponents. And I think a lot of ordinary Indians they might want to vote for Modi, but I think they would like to vote for candidates who wins their votes rather than, manipulates his way to power. That's not good. So I think that ethos is still there among many Indians, I think.
Yeah, India is a complex country. In 77, Congress was punished by the electorate.
Absolutely.
And a lot of people are kind of drawing parallels between then and now. But we really don't know how things are going to pan out right now. But just looking at maybe the hypothesis, if Modi returns to power, what happens to India? You did speak a bit about that, but if you want to add something more, And looking at the reverse hypothesis, what if he loses or does not get a majority? What is the future of India? You know, after all, his Hindu majoritarian narrative has penetrated deep into the social fabric, has infiltrated institutions and weakened institutions.
Yeah. So that latter part, the way in which they have weakened institutions, placed their own loyalists in many positions of power in the bureaucracy, in public institutions across the country, that those effects will be there for a very long time. Also, if Modi was to lose either this time or next time, right? Because electoral power is only one thing. And I think what the BJP has learned is to actually get hold of the whole apparatus of power, government, bureaucracy, all these things, and fully penetrate it. Also, in some ways, I feel politicized the Indian army and the armed forces by constantly projecting them as the true heart of the nation in a way that was completely unheard of, even at the height of Congress' abuse of power. They never did that. So I think that those effects are going to stay in there for a long time, regardless of the electoral outcome. And any kind of new configuration, whatever it may be, even if it's a coalition or whatever, would have to reckon with it and think about India's institutions and how they can be maybe reconstituted in a way that makes them stronger and more independent. But that aside, I think it's highly unlikely that he's going to lose power altogether. I don't think so. I think that the most likely outcome is that there will be a victory of some sort, but of a more calibrated and less triumphant kind than is projected. That's often the case in politics, right? I don't know that the BJP knew that they were going to get so much more tailwind in 2019 as they did, but they did. They are they've come to bank on it. They've come to believe in their own narrative, their own immense powers of running elections and that kind of thing. I'm not convinced that it'll be upwards, just more, right? Because the problem with the Hindu nationalist program is that it's not much of a program. In a sense that many key policies are kind of revamped versions of policies that were made much earlier. Much of the new welfare schemes or that are not so new are being relaunched now with Modi's name on it and so on. So if you look at the policies that are actually being implemented, there hasn't been that much new, right? And that's because fundamentally, and I've said this before, Hindu nationalism is a very thin program in a sense that it's about establishing Hindu dominance, a Hindu nation, preeminence of Hindus, possibly to roll back democratic institutions. But it doesn't have like a big idea of what kind of society India should be. In fact, it's a fundamentally conservative program that is not vested in any kind of social reform, right? And if India is to be this new superpower, fully modern, there's so many things that have to change in India, such as basic attention to producing human welfare and human health, primary schooling, fundamental things, not shiny highways, but basic investment in human capital. That's what made China the superpower it is today, right? Because the communists actually did that. They did many other things, but they invested in this in a massive way. They created the basis. India has never done that. So because the BJP doesn't have a program of a real vision of what India is to be, except a symbolic, we have to have flags everywhere, we have to worship strength, but there is no vision of how to organize Indian society in a way that's different from what has come before, because it's a fundamentally conservative program. I think that can only go so far.
So do we have a very grim future ahead, or, is there a possibility of liberal, democratic, and secular values being restored to at least what they were before? And If so, what is the way forward?
I'm somewhat pessimistic in the short run, but I'm more optimistic in the long run. By that I mean that India is constantly changing, and people's expectations of what kind of life they want is constantly evolving. And I don't think that can be bottled up or stopped at any point in time. Um, at the moment, many people think that Modi is the one who can deliver this kind of new modern India, but the desire for a new modern India is very strong, right? It's very strong. Some people would like it to be without democracy, some would like it to be without minorities, right? But they all want it, right? A sort of modern India. So I think the contest is really about who can produce that, who can deliver that. And at the moment, it's a lot of cosmetics. I mean, it's a lot of infrastructural investment. Yes, the airports are better, the highways are better, and all that. And that counts for a lot as a kind of, that's the India we're going to look at. But in the long run, I think people are looking for also a transformation of certain things in Indian society that can guarantee a better life for many. Whether secular and liberal, I mean, I've written about this in my book a few years ago. I think India's the embedding of liberal secular values in India is weaker than we would like to believe. But there is a strong belief and a strong value placed on democracy, not necessarily democracy as a game where we always politely listen to our opponent and we respect everybody's difference and all that. No, but democracy as a game where everybody can express a voice, and that where you are seen and recognized to some extent, and where your voice and your vote is registered and respected. That part of democracy, I think, is very strongly embedded. As I said, at the moment, Modi seems to deliver this recognition, right? But I'm not sure that that will hold up forever. So that's why I'm more
So you'd say it's a
optimistic in
matter
the
of
long
time.
run. Yeah.
So you'd say it's a matter of time. Things will change, but it's a matter of time, right?
Because I think that there is a sort of almost inevitability to the path that's been taken, and the way in which the Indian economy is slowly developing. It's in a very highly uneven way and all that. But there is a certain, let's say, an unleashing of expectations, and these expectations are at the moment, satisfied by this sort of new game of politics as a kind of grand spectacle where we can be on the winning team and we can see the bad guys, the Muslims, lose, and all these ideas of re-engineering history as if it was in a different way, and all these Bollywood films are all about that. But that can only go so far, right? That can only go so far. So that unleashing of that kind of energy and motivation and aspiration, I don't see that being forever kept within the confines of a Hindutva ideology, which in any case is a very weak ideology. It only has one program, which is we all Hindus and we should decide and we should keep the minorities in check. They're already in check. They're already structurally completely isolated in Indian society. And if you ask many Muslims, they'll say, yes, we lost, right? We lost.
Yeah.
They won. So what's next? How long can you kick someone who's already lying down, right? And how much is there in that? And I don't. So that's why I think there is a limit. There's a time limit to this. There is a kind of expiry date to this project in the long run. But I don't know how long. That's the problem.
So
And it's not going to go away.
Even as the present looks grim,
yeah.
Let's end it on a more optimistic note.
Yeah, I believe young people. I was just in India talking to all these students at these universities and all that. I mean, these people are not dumb, right? They're very clever, very ambitious, and they are well informed about the world in the way that no previous generation of Indians have ever been, right? And those people are not going to be, you can, as the old saying is, right, you can fool some of the people some of the time, but you can't fool all the people all the time. And that holds true of India.
Thank you so much, Professor Hansen. As always, you're just brilliant. Thank you for bringing out all the complexities and the nuance.
Thank
Thank you
you.
so much.
Thanks for having me. All right.
A
Bye.
pleasure listening.